Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to practice object-oriented programming. We're just very introductory. And so get your Java workspace open in Eclipse, and we're just going to create a new Java project. Okay, it's a Java project. We're going to do it the Java way. Okay, a lot of programming languages do object-oriented programming, but they many times have slightly different ways of doing it. Okay, so we're just going to call this OOP test. Okay, just like so. Actually, I'm going to get rid of that space. I don't like spaces. Okay, everything else is going to stay default. And I'm going to click Finish. So on our Package Explorer, if you have it, you will see it on the left, OOP test. We're going to add two classes to it. Okay. Now, a class is a blueprint for an object. If we're going to, and by the way, this comes from the Fundamentals of Java, the AP Computer Science Essentials for the A and AB exams for Java. Okay. And AP Computer Science, they've introduced a new course. But this is from the one that they've been doing for a long time now. Anyway, so it comes from here, so it's nothing new on my part, but I'm just talking you through what's going on. So when you create a new class, like I said, it's a blueprint. The naming convention for a class is always that you capitalize the first letter. And again, we're doing this the Java way. So a Java class will start with an S, a capital letter, excuse me. And this is going to be a student. Now, a class like this is not going to have a main method. We're going to get rid of that because we're building out the class. We're going to leave everything else the same. As far as modifiers go, you can check public. Otherwise, you will have to type it in. Okay? So when we create it, you have a very simple public class student like so. If you were going to import any libraries, like the system time, or you're going to try to do Java utils or something like that, you would import it above this class declaration. We call that a class declaration. And basically, all of our code that's going to be sort of the, you might want to call it genetics of the student, are going to go inside these curly brackets. If you hit enter, when you go to that line, it should go to the next line and indent it. So I go up here, line 3 is indented. Now, I'm going to show you a little comment of the pattern for our classes. We're going to declare all instance variables. These are variables that are tied into our student definition. Okay, so we've got a lot of students here. Every student has their own unique name. Okay, and so an instance variable would be a variable like name, so that we can capture each individual students' names. And so that's one of the beauties of object-oriented programming. So we're going to declare instance variables like name, and in this case, we're going to just do 3 test scores. Okay. Then, after we've declared all of those instance variables, we're going to create our constructor methods. And I'm going to put a little /s here because the constructor method is what gets run the very first time you create an object. We would call an individual student an instance of the student class. And that's just the naming convention we use. So when we're talking about an instant, we're saying each individual student, not a student theoretical or in general. Okay. So when we construct a student, it happens one time and one time only when we create a new student. Okay. And the reason why I put a little /s is because there's actually different ways you can do it. You might want to create a student where it just automatically generates it and just gives default values. Or you might want to have it where you ask what the name of the student is, in which case it would require a name first, then it would create it and set the name. So it's up to you how you design objects. In this case, I'm leaving it open for the possibility that we have more than one constructor. Now notice what happened here. Did you see how I went down a line and my cursor's on the left? If I hit backspace, it automatically tabs it. Okay, you want to make heavy use of tabbing. You see how these all line up? This is going to really help your program later. Once you've done the constructor method, we'll have other methods. Primarily, get and set, which are also known as accessors and mutators. And I will explain what that means in just a moment. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we want to declare our instance variables. Now, we're going to try to protect our student class by making these variables private. You'll notice the student is public. Now, this idea of public or private is, public means anything else in our project can read it. Okay? If it's private, only the student class can access that variable. So if I put private and then I do string name, okay, this is just declaring a variable, setting aside room in the memory for this variable called name. Okay? And by making it private, you will not be able to access that variable anywhere except inside. Okay? And so we're also going to do, for test score, same thing. Private int, because they're going to be integers. A test score anywhere between, let's say, 0 and 100. Okay. Now, another reason why you might want to set it private is that you might want to, for example, not allow a test score to be a negative number or over 100. And if you want to write some rules for, like what is a valid value or not, that's why you would make this you make it private here, and then when you are dealing with test scores, like entering scores, then you might want to have some additional code that won't allow you to put in inappropriate information. Okay, so that's another reason why we might make the instance variables private. And of course, we're going to do the same thing for the remaining test scores. Now, this is not the most efficient way to do it. It's an introduction. It's here to show you just kind of what you can do. The other thing you'll note, there's all these little light bulbs. That's because we haven't used any of these at all. Now, in order to make a student, we need to have a constructor method. Okay. Now, the way you can tell it's a constructor method is it's going to have the exact same name as your class. Okay. Also, a constructor method, we need to be able to create our students outside of the class. So we have to make it public. Okay. So we're going to say it's public, and then we're going to write student. Okay. Now, notice it follows the exact case of the letters. So capital S and lowercase everything else. It matches the spelling of it. And the only difference between the class here and the constructor is on our constructor, it's a method. And it's a method, in other words, it's a function. And so we need to have those parentheses. The other thing you might want to think about is if that constructor requires that you have the name, you might want to pass it the name as a parameter. For now, we're not going to do that just yet. Okay. So I create, now that was really fast, but I created my opening curly bracket, and immediately when I hit enter, it closed it and it indented the second line. Once again, keep track of the indentation. So in the constructor method, we're going to just initialize our properties. Okay. So in this case, we're going to say name equals, and we're just going to give it an empty string. And we're going to put test1 equals 0. And test2 equals 0 as well. And same thing goes for test3. Like so. Okay. All right, so at this point, this creates our student, gives it a name, test, and different test values. So what we're going to do now is let's go ahead and save your changes. And then what I'd like you to do is create a second class. And in our second class, we're going to try to make a student. Sounds more ominous than it really is. Basically, we're going to create a student class. Okay, so we're going to create another class inside of our project. And so I just right-click on the Package Explorer, New Class. Okay, and we're going to call this StudentTest. Start with a capital S. Notice it doesn't let me name it the same as the other one. So it gave me that warning. And then I say student test. And then on here, we are going to check the public static void main string args, because this is just going to be a way of seeing if we can interact with our student objects. So I click finish. And now we have this. Okay. So I'm going to create, basically, create our first student. Okay. To declare an object, what you do is you write the name of the object. student, the name of the class, I should say. Student S1. Now notice, it actually didn't yell at us that we created student. Okay? It's because we already have a public class for our student. So it recognizes that it's in the same project. Now, of course, if we tried this with anything else that we have not created, for example, Bob the chicken, B1, notice it doesn't allow us to do that because we never coded that as a class. Okay. One of these days, you got to ask me about Bob the chicken if you have not heard my story. All right. By the way, if you're the student who first made the name Bob the chicken, do email me. I want to thank you. Okay. Moving along. All right. So we create our first student. S1 represents the student. Now, that student, you would think, would have a little variable called name. And yet, look at that. It says right here, the field student name is not visible. Okay? That's because we made name private.